Thanks, Rob, and I'm pleased to bring the support of the Fire Brigade Union to the vigil here tonight, including the 5,500 members of ours here in London who this Saturday will be on strike against the threat to sack them all. And we've had the Tory chair of the London Fire Authority in the media over the weekend saying that he's quite relaxed about sacking the entire fire brigade and doing what Ronald Reagan did to the US air traffic controllers in the 1980s. Well, Tory politicians like Brian Coleman may take their inspiration from US presidents like Ronald Reagan. We would rather take our inspiration from people like the 5 Cuban heroes who are in prison in Miami now for trying to stop terrorism that's being sponsored in the USA against their country. And it's an absolute disgrace that those 5 Cuban heroes are still in that prison in Miami. And the US claims that they are engaged in a war on terror. And yet people, self-confessed terrorists who have planted bombs in Cuban hotels, who have planted bombs on Cuban airplanes, are allowed to walk freely the streets of the USA, while the 5 Cuban heroes who are attempting to stop terrorist attacks against Cuba are in prison, and that's a disgrace. And the US government claims that Cuba is a state sponsor of terrorism, which is an absolute outrage, when in reality it's the US government that has sponsored terrorist attacks against Cuba for decades, and that's got to stop. And the 5 Cubans in the Miami prison can only wish, really, can't they, that they were Russians instead, because earlier this year 10 Russian spies were discovered working in the USA, and they were all deported to Russia within a couple of weeks. And I read in the press this week that those 10 Russians had a ceremony at the Kremlin where they were awarded the highest award that is possible to give them in Russia, and I wish them good luck. And I look forward to the day when the 5 Cuban heroes return to Cuba and they are given their rightful awards at the Cuban government headquarters. And the reality is, of course, that the US policy against the 5 Cubans who are in the US prisons, like all US policy towards Cuba, is totally irrational, it's hypocritical, and it's all based on wanting to punish Cuba. It's wanting to punish Cuba for daring to have a revolution. It's wanting to punish Cuba for daring to nationalize US companies who've been exploiting the Cuban people for many years, and it's wanting to punish Cuba for daring to be a beacon to people throughout the world, for showing that there is a way of doing things differently, that we could have a better world, and Cuba's showing how that might be done. So I'm pleased to bring the support of the Fire Brigade Union, our continuing support for the Cuba Solidarity Campaign and the campaign to release the 5 Cuban heroes. And like other speakers tonight earlier have said, I hope that we don't have to be here this time next year. I hope that we will be able to come here and have a party at some stage very soon to celebrate the release of those 5 Cubans in US prisons. Thank you very much.